just read for an hour sometime.
And I am one of the coordinators of the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which is just one of the things that I lab, and I work with the Monarch joint venture, and we do a lot of educational programs, but this is one of my main responsibilities. And so to start things off, I brought monarchs with me on the airplane, so to start things off, we're going to observe them, and you guys are going to teach me what you already know about monarchs. I brought with me pretty much the entire monarch life cycle, and so we're just going to go through one at a time, and you guys are welcome to hold them, the bigger caterpillars at least, and observe them. I have hand lenses and life cycle cards, so if you want to flip through those to help you identify and observe. We'll start with eggs and really tiny caterpillars. Okay. So it looks like my eggs didn't fare so well on the airplane. This really small off-white dot is a monarch egg, and so if I pass it around, you might want to look at it through the hand lens. And so monarch eggs take 3 to 5 days to hatch. And so when they're ready to hatch, you can see this second egg over here. They turn a really dark color, and that doesn't mean that they're dead. That just means that they're ready to emerge. And so if you're familiar with complete metamorphosis, that's monarchs undergo complete metamorphosis, in which they go through egg, larva, pupa, and adult stages. And so I have all of them here today. And so these are eggs and first instars. So an instar is the what we call the stage of the caterpillar. So the caterpillars go through 5 molts. They go through 5 different stages as a caterpillar. And so each time they shed their skin, they're called the next instar. So they start as, once they hatch, they're a first instar, and then they shed their skin to a second instar. And so they go through 5 instar phases before they become a chrysalis.
Why instar?
Gosh, that's so
What's
cool.
the origin of that?
I don't know. So I'll pass these around, and feel free to take a hand lens and observe them. And while you guys are looking, try to listen in, and I will move on to the next phase of caterpillar.
Wendy, I have a question. Is this information in those little books?
And it's also on the data sheets that you have in your packet, the information, yes.
Oh, they're little bitty ones.
do they eggs, are they in clusters?
Are the eggs in clusters?
Or do they lay individual eggs?
They lay individual eggs for the most part.
Oh.
So why did you say they didn't do well on the airplane?
They didn't do well on the airplane because it was warm and
But what did you see when you looked down here?
that the egg is dead in there.
Oh, there's a dead egg in here?
Yeah,
How did you know that?
because it's not full and round.
Oh,
How many eggs would an adult lay?
An adult monarch can lay about over 100, if maybe not closer to 200 eggs in her lifetime.
Do you have a first instar on that?
Yeah.
Could you just, maybe so that.
wow, this is really great for the lens. Yeah.
Barbara can help you if you want a close-up of the eggs or the first instars,
No,
Peg.
will they lay those on the upper side or the underside, if we're looking for them?
That's a good question. Will they lay the eggs on the upper side of the leaf or the bottom side of the leaf? And the answer is both, but generally on the underside of the leaf. Because when a female, it's called oviposition, and so when she lays an egg on a leaf, she generally lands on the top of the plant and then curls her abdomen underneath to lay the egg on the underside. But we do find them on the tops of the leaves.
What time of the year does the egg laying start?
We'll cover all of this in the presentation. I just want to, we'll get through this, and then we're going to cover this in a little bit more depth.
Cool.
These are third instars. I skipped second instars, but you can see how they're tentacles. They're not called antennae. They are called tentacles on the front and the back of the monarch. They extend about to the end of their head, and they have both tentacles on the front and the back end. So these are third instars. So they've molted or shed their skin twice.
Latin for equivalent. Instar.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it comes from.
So I'll pass those around, and we can.
Equivalent.
Did you say the adult would
Yeah.
live just a year? How long?
It depends on whether or not it's the migratory generation, and so the migrating generation can live up to about 9 months, but the breeding generations only live about a month.
Short life and a gay one.
And so,
This is written down somewhere.
mhm. And it's all in my presentation.
Okay.
So we'll get there. We're just observing here. And next we have fourth instars, and so you can see how they're a little bit bigger. Size is not always a determining factor in monarchs. So I like to go by the length of their tentacles. And so you can see how this guy's tentacles are longer than they don't just reach the end of his face. They extend beyond. So these are fourth instars.
Oh, is this the larva or the pupa?
This is a larva. These are all larvae. And so you can see, these guys are pretty different in size. But they're both fourth instars. So there is sometimes a big size difference.
So they grow fast.
They grow fast. So
Do they shed the skin? I mean, how do they go from one stage to another? Do
they shed their skin. So they have these triggers that once they've eaten so much milkweed and they start to stretch their skin just enough, they release this hormone that they'll crawl out of their skin. And monarchs don't waste anything. They eat their skin. Yep, they eat their skin. And I actually, if I can find it, it's called exuvium. And so I have one. I saved it so that you can see what it looks like for monarchs to crawl out of their skin and what it looks like. It kind of just looks like a dead caterpillar, but it is. It's called exuvium. And so it's just, you can see it's just really scrunched together. It's the remains of their skin, and then they'll go back and they'll eat that. So if you want to pass around the chewed leaf.
Wendy, I have a question.
Sure.
How about all those little black things? Is that excrement?
That's a good question. This is, all of the little black dots in these containers are excrement, as she called it, but we like to call it frass. So
Being quite official, saying excrement.
monarch waste is called frass. F-R-A-S-S. Frass.
F-R-A-S-S.
Mhm. And so they frass a lot. And now we get to the big guys, the big, beautiful monarch caterpillars. And so you can see how these guys are much bigger. Early fifth instars are not quite this big. These vary in size the most. They really are a lot bigger than the other instars. And you can see how their tentacles are really long and they're starting to droop. They get really droopy. And that's how you know that it's a fifth instar.
Do they use those for anything in particular?
The tentacles are basically their sense. Monarch caterpillars don't see very well at all. And so it's a way for them to sense their surroundings.
What are they sensitive to? Infrared or vibration? Do we know?
I'm not sure about infrared, but they can sense vibrations and they use it to kind of test the milkweed plants, and because milkweed is the only host plant for monarch caterpillars, so they want to make sure that they're eating milkweed rather than something else that doesn't taste very good to them.
Okay.
So you can actually, if you guys want, you can hold these. You can handle them. They're pretty. This guy was making silk. They're pretty hardy. You can hold them. They'll crawl around your hand. Sometimes they'll just curl up. That just means that they're scared. And so, but you can see this guy. He's trying to figure out what I am or why I'm holding him.
Are you edible?
So if you guys want, I have a few of them in here. So if you guys want to hold a caterpillar, feel free.
Why do
Look
they
at
have
this guy, 'cause he's got a
antenna-like
bird.
structures on either end?
Mine's a cockatiel.
Also a great question. Barb asked why they have tentacles on both the front and the back side, and one reason is possibly to deter predators. So the coloration of monarchs is really important for them. You see how they're really bright and they're yellow and they're striped, And that's to tell predators that, hey, I'm toxic, don't eat me. And so the bright coloration and then the tentacles on the back can look like the front to a predator. So it looks like the monarchs, they're not being snuck up on. So that could be one reason. And so anybody else want to hold a caterpillar?
Are these feet that we're seeing?
They have monarchs, caterpillars. So we all know that insects have 6 legs, right?
Yeah.
And so monarch caterpillars appear to have more than 6 legs.
Yeah.
And so if you see the front, if you look to the front of the caterpillar, there are 3 sets of sharp legs.
Yeah.
Those are their insect legs, and the remainder of the legs are called prolegs. So they're just for movement, and they will, when the adult, they won't have them anymore. This caterpillar is juicing on me.
Do they have suction cups?
The legs are just to help them grasp the milkweed.
So they can go upside down without falling off.
Mm-hmm. So they can eat. So we're not totally sure about the behaviors of monarchs on the milkweed plants, but it would make more sense for them to not eat on the top sides of the leaves because they're more vulnerable to predators. And so to be able to hang upside down, they have to have these grasping feet that can allow them to hang upside down on the plant.
Are they little claws rather than a suction cup?
Yeah, they have hooks and yep. Oh, you. Hi, buddy. Anybody else want to hold one?
They eat the leaves from the outside in, or?
I'd like to be
Not all the time. And it depends on the instar. The pattern in which the monarchs eat the leaves, it really depends. First instars, the toxins in the milkweed, first instars don't, they try to avoid consuming as much of that as possible because it can be really harmful to them. So they start in eating a little C shape to cut off the flow of the latex. Yep, so they make a little C in the middle of the leaf to cut off the flow of the latex to that part of the leaf, and then they kind of just chew around the little circle.
Oh my God.
And the larger instars, as you can see, aren't as picky. They just keep notching away, and so they sequester the toxins, the glycosides that are in the milkweed plants, and that's what makes them distasteful to predators. And so they spin this silk pad on the top of wherever on the structure that they want to form their chrysalis, and they attach themselves from the hind end, and then they hang upside down in this J shape. And so during this stage, they're like this for about 6 or 8 hours, and they slowly make the transformation inside them to inside this J is a monarch chrysalis. And so in order to become that, they need to split their skin. So they hang like this for a number of hours, and then they just split right down the middle, and they shed their skin one last time. And I have
underneath that is the chrysalis.
And underneath that is the chrysalis. Yep. And I have a good series of photos on my presentation that will be able to see that. We probably won't see this guy shed his skin today. It'll be later this afternoon or this evening. And you can really tell when they're ready to form their chrysalis or when they're ready to split, they start to hang a little bit lower, so they straighten out a little bit, and they get really puffy, and you can start to see the green through, and then all of a sudden they split their skin, and it takes about a minute.
Wow. Skipping intelligent design, do we have any idea, the sequence that led to such a complex procedure? It makes human beings look pretty damn straightforward.
Right.
Do we have any prehistory? How far back can we go with these insects? Probably not very far, because it's all soft tissue, so it's not going to get preserved.
Right. That would be something for me to explore. I'm not sure. So I'm not going to pass this guy around because if everybody can see him, they're pretty fragile, so we're trying not to bounce them around a little bit because they don't like that. They're pretty picky in this stage. So I'm not going to pass this guy around, but
So
Yeah, I've actually seen them try to, when they come free, they got a little stick.
Yep.
They try to reattach to the silk. That's kind
Yeah,
of fun to watch.
so the cremaster is
Yeah.
the little stick that you're talking
Yeah.
about. So they,
because they don't always make it. Some of
this
them drop.
attachment comes, when they form their chrysalis, it's called a cremaster. It's just a little black stick that connects the pupa or the chrysalis to the top of the container, and they wiggle and they squirm and they try to get that last molt of skin. They try to just get rid of it, so they wiggle, and it's really a fun process to watch. So if you get a chance to see it, you're
Now,
lucky.
what is the J for? Why does it form the J?
Just to allow it time to prepare to be a chrysalis. It's that release of hormones inside them that says, I'm ready to be a chrysalis. But they need some time to prepare. And then we get the monarch chrysalis. And you can see they're really, really very pretty. They have gold dots and they're this bright, wonderful green color.
Can you pass that around?
Yeah, we can pass this around.
So there's no sign of the J, so part of the J must essentially fall away.
The skin does.
Yeah.
Yep, they shed the skin. Sometimes it stays attached at the top here,
Yeah.
but for the most part, the skin falls off.
And that takes the J shape with it.
Now, is that called are they pupa there? Is that called?
Yep, so when butterflies form a pupa is a more general term. So the chrysalis is a more specific name for the pupa of a butterfly, just as the cocoon is a more specific term for the pupa of a moth. So anything that goes through complete metamorphosis has a pupa. So we call them a pupa, we call them a chrysalis, we kind of use it interchangeably.
But you don't call it a cocoon.
Nope. A cocoon has a silk covering around the whole outside of the pupa.
I can see the silk platform and I can see the stick.
The cremaster.
That's the name of the stick.
Yep. And
What are the dots on there? Is there any significance to those that can?
I'm not sure if there's a significance to the gold dots on the chrysalis. I know that there is a way to tell male from female in the chrysalis, but I have never learned how to do that, and so that I can't tell you. But it could be partially like to deter predators, and they're the green color to try and blend in with their surroundings, and so it could just be to help them blend with their surroundings. So if
You can see
everybody
the
gets a
black
chance
line
to,
down their rear, too.
yeah, and the,
No, you see a little black line, right?
But the color changes as they age.
yeah, so if you look through the life
You'll
cycle
see it's
cards,
like a little black line down the rear.
monarchs are in the chrysalis stage for 9 to 16 days. All of the growth of monarchs is dependent on temperature. The generation that overwinters in Mexico. And then that generation, they overwinter in Mexico, and then they start to repopulate the southern United States, mostly Texas. And so and then they usually die there. The ones that overwinter in Mexico really don't make it farther than the southern United States. And so it's that generation that starts to move even farther north and repopulate the rest of the northern breeding grounds. So, and then they'll have yet another generation, and sometimes even one more, before they migrate back to Mexico in the final generation.
Would any migrate from Vermont to Mexico?
They do.
Doesn't show very good taste, does it?
Yeah, we will. We'll go over that. I have some great maps in my presentation. So, they're a ways into southern Canada.
They don't get up into the boreal forest.
Nope, not quite that far.
I see there are 3 milkweeds. Do they just go for the common milkweed?
There are more than 3 species of
Well,
milkweed.
Okay, this has only got 3. It's got butterfly, common, and marsh.
Yep, those are 3 of the most important ones for monarchs.
And they don't care which one they're on? Oh, okay.
Generally not. There's a little bit of preference. I would say that the majority of monarchs use common milkweed,
Okay.
but that's maybe because it's the most, there's the most of it. But monarchs, we've come up with some priority milkweed species that monarchs tend to use more. butterfly weed is a really important nectar plant, and it's a really important, butterflies or monarchs do use it, but not quite as much as common milkweed. So there's a balance there. Okay, moving on to our final stage, the adult. Have you all seen an adult monarch before? So you can see that they only have just the 6 legs like a regular insect.
Now, do they
These guys
have
are,
use of all those legs? Because I know some butterflies, the first 2 they don't.
yeah, the first 2 are really, really tiny and you can't hardly see them.
Yeah, because I know painted ladies have them, but they don't use those
Right,
first 2
right.
legs. They're
Yep.
atrophy.
Yep,
Where
these are kind of like that as
yeah.
well, yes.
Wasn't sure because some have use, some don't.
And so these monarchs are dead from our lab. I didn't kill them on the airplane. They started as dead, and so.
Remind us the difference between the monarch and the vice.
Okay, and that's better seen in pictures, which I have a picture on the slideshow. So this is anybody from the MLMP. We call it MLMP. You'll have to get used to that if I say MLMP and you go, what is MLMP? It is the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. So that's just my acronym that I use for what we do. And so in my presentation, we did what we already know. So I gave you guys a chance to look at the monarchs that I brought and to really try and get a feel for what they look like and what you're looking for in the wild. And so I'm going to go over that again and give you a few more little tricks of identifying them and how to find them in the wild. And we're also going to go over more of the biology, the total biology of the monarch and their overwintering and migration. And then we're going to get more into the MLMP itself and how we collect data and how we use the data and what's in it for you. And then I'm going to touch just a little bit, if we have time, on other citizen science projects involving monarchs. So we're just one project involving monarchs, but there are a number of them that people can be involved with. And so we focus more on understanding the breeding population of monarchs, the eggs and the larvae. And there are a bunch of studies on how to track the migration and how to establish monarch habitat. So, and then hopefully this afternoon we're going to get outside and actually identify some milkweed in the wild and learn how to look for it and how to monitor. And I brought, since we chances are we won't find any monarchs or eggs here and we don't have a site set up here, I brought data that I collected in Minnesota this week. And so I can show you how to use our website and how to enter your data online on our website. So, as we mentioned back here, there are over 100 different species of milkweed, but monarchs don't use all of them. I think monarchs are known to use about 25 or more species of milkweed. And so some of the more common ones that monarchs use are common milkweed, world milkweed, poke milkweed. So the 2 on the right are not quite as common as per se common milkweed or swamp milkweed, or butterfly milkweed. Butterfly milkweed is very common throughout the United States. And so they're all of the genus Asclepias. And so Asclepias syriaca is common milkweed. You can see that's what we were seeing outside in the garden here. And that's probably what you'll see the majority of. And world milkweed is a little bit harder to find. You can see the really thin leaves. Monarchs do use it. It's really surprising how monarchs can use a plant like that because they eat so much. But you do find monarchs on world milkweed. And again, just a few more examples of common milkweed that you guys might find around here. I didn't go into all 100 species or even all 20 species that monarchs use, but these are some of the more likely ones that you will find here in Vermont. So swamp milkweed generally found in wet areas. Butterfly weed is more the hillsides, drier areas, sandy areas. Asclepias tuberosa and Asclepias incarnata is swamp milkweed. So when we observed the monarchs firsthand, you could see that all of them were feeding on milkweed. And I know I touched on that already, that monarch caterpillars only eat milkweed. This is not the case for monarch adults. And so when you're thinking about your butterfly garden and your butterfly habitat, you really want to make sure that not only do you have milkweed for the monarch caterpillars to eat, but you want to have a variety of nectar sources for the adults, because adults don't only nectar on milkweed, they nectar on a variety of plants. So I think the top is lilac, but I can't really tell. And so lilac is a really important one for the monarchs migrating back because it's early to bloom, and so the monarchs migrating back can use that as a nectar source. Other examples, this bottom one is on a zinnia. The middle is butterfly weed, so that's a really important nectar plant as well. We've got some Joe Pye and aster, and liatris is a really popular butterfly plant. So you can see that just having a really variety of nectar plants for monarch butterflies to use, and other pollinators as well. It's really, like I mentioned outside, monarchs are not really important pollinators. They do a little bit of pollination, but bees are really the important pollinators. They do, but it is important for monarchs to have these nectar sources as well. So we're going to go back through what I showed you in the observing stations. We all know this is an egg, a monarch egg. And so here's a really close-up view. You can see the full round shape of the egg, but now you know how really small they are on the bottom of the milkweed leaf. And so they come to a point at the top. So if you bring your magnifying glass or your hand lens out in the field with you, you can look at it under the microscope or under the lens just to make sure that it really is a monarch egg, because there are a lot of things out there in the wild that you could mistake for a monarch egg. Perhaps another insect's egg, or a spot of latex on the milkweed sometimes can look like a monarch egg. So you have to be really sure. And they have these longitudinal ridges that you can see. Much easier through a hand lens or on a blown up picture. And the eggs take 3 to 5 days to hatch, depending on temperature. So this is everybody together, all of the stages of the eggs and caterpillars. So you can really see the size difference. This is really proportional of the size difference between the caterpillars. So they really grow a lot in just a few weeks. And an instar is the period between their molting. So they eat, they stretch enough, and then they shed their skin, eat their skin, and then they start eating again just to keep growing, all on milkweed. So this is the first instar. We saw a few of them in the petri dish, and the first instars are really, really tiny, and sometimes it's really hard to find them on a milkweed plant because they don't have that signature black and white and yellow striping like the big caterpillars have. They really kind of blend in with the milkweed a lot better, and so they're sometimes really hard to find in the wild. So it's really good to be thorough and to really look at the plant, because you can stare at a leaf and not see anything on it, but and so that's been nice if the monarchs were here and I could find one to show you that in the wild. But when you they just start to, and then they hang skin, and then so you see how in this photo the wings are really small and wrinkly and wet, and so in order for the monarch to fly and go nectar, they need to pump up their wings with fluids. And so they hang upside down for, it takes a number of hours, for probably the whole morning, for them to just hang there and dry and pump fluids into their wings. And once they're dry and able to flap their wings, and then they'll go off and fly and mate and nectar, and that is a monarch adult. This process is also very fast. It takes a little bit longer than the monarch caterpillar, or the pupation. It takes a little bit longer. It takes about 5 minutes, but still really quick for them to come out of their casing.
Does the fluid stay in the wings?
It just, the fluid is just to fill the wings, the veins in their wings, and so, yeah.
So there is fluid in the wings even when they're mature and flying away.
You know, I
think they draw it back in.
yeah,
'Cause the wings
they do draw the, right, because the adult wings, if you break them open, they're not wet, and so they must draw it back into their body, or even they drip. So when the monarch is filling their wings, they drip meconium into the bottom of the container. So until they're dry, they continue to drip these fluids out of their wings. Oh, and I should mention that monarchs generally emerge in the morning. So you're more likely to find a new monarch bright and early in the morning. So if you find one hanging like this, they generally come out just as the sun rises, generally. So here's just a little bit of a summary. Eggs take 3 to 5 days, and larvae take 10 to 14 days total. And so every 2 to 5 days, the larva will molt its skin and become the next instar. And so total in the larval stage, it takes about 2 weeks, 16 days. And the pupa, again, the pupa alone takes 10 to 14 days. So the growth and development stage of a monarch is about a month. And then the adult lives for an additional month if it's a breeding adult. And I know I mentioned back there, I'm not sure if you all heard it, but the migrating adults can live for 9 months. They need to survive the whole trip down to Mexico, and they need to survive in Mexico the whole winter and then start coming back. And so they survive 9 months about. So it varies between the generations, but the breeding populations generally only the adult lasts about a month. So here's the test. I taught you all how to identify male from female, and anybody know? The photo on the right is a male. Yep, because you can see the brighter coloration, and the black androconial pouches are just the black spots on the hind wings. And the photo on the left is a female.
Much better looking on the right.
This is a pretty bad picture of a female monarch. She looks a little old and tattered.
More dynamic on the left.
Yeah, she's been working hard. Okay, so here's the true test. These are larval stages of monarchs, and so we're going to try and guess what stage of monarch this is. First, yes. First are generally pretty easy. You guys are good. This is a 4th instar. 5th. Whoops. Sorry, I jumped the gun on that one. So I already gave you the answer. Both are seconds here, so you can really see how their tentacles are about the same proportionally to their body, but the one on the right is about half the size of the one on the left. And so it really depends on the if a monarch molts into a second, if there's another second that's been growing for 3 days, they're going to be different in size. So it's really important to know that there really can be a big size difference between the instars of the same, between second instars and between third instars.
But as adults, are they generally pretty much the same size?
As adults?
Yeah.
As adults, they are pretty much generally the same size. There is variation.
That one on the right could actually grow to be as big as that one on the left.
Yep, and it will. It just is the day at which it is developing. So here we're going to talk about the nasty predators and parasitoids that affect monarchs. I study one of them in particular. This wasp on the right side in the middle is what I have been studying for a number of years. It is called Pteromalus puparum, and it's a relatively new monarch parasitoid that we're starting to find. It is generally introduced to control pests, and so it'll parasitize a monarch in that it lays its eggs inside the monarch chrysalis, and rather than the monarch emerging, these wasps will come out. Mm-hmm.
And what were they introduced to attack?
They were introduced to attack the cabbage butterflies. Mm-hmm. And so, and I've also seen a similar species. I don't know if it's the same species, but they are used to control flies in pastures. And so they're really an introduced species, or an introduced parasitoid that have non-target effects on. They're introduced to control a pest, but they also, they're generalists, so they affect other species as well.
Are these the same ones that do tomato hornworm moths?
Possibly, yeah. I'm not sure of that though.
I was told that you should leave the ones with the egg sacs alone, because they'll get more tomato hornworm moths later.
Yeah, yeah. So we have a number of pictures. There's a mantid on the left, and these two are of ants. And ants can attack small caterpillars. For the most part, they leave them alone, but they can attack small caterpillars. This guy will inject the spined shoulder stink bug. He will attack the monarch caterpillars, the rather large monarch caterpillars, and inject this enzyme into them that just liquefies them, and then he sucks out the liquid. So he's a pretty nasty guy. And another huge predator of monarchs, or a huge parasitoid of monarchs, is the tachinid fly. And we're seeing a lot of tachinid flies. They will lay their eggs on top of a monarch caterpillar, a late instar monarch caterpillar. And so the larger instars that you find in the wild are more likely to be parasitized by this tachinid fly. And the egg, once the egg hatches, it burrows into the monarch caterpillar and develops inside it. And when the monarch is a jay or an early pupa, these fly larvae or maggots will burrow out of the monarch, and this string here is representative of a tachinid fly, and the maggots drop to the ground on this fibrous string, and then they form their pupa, and the pupa on the ground develop and become adult flies. So they can be a huge problem for monarch populations.
Birds are pretty clever. Are they a threat to the monarch in any stage?
The question was if birds were a threat to monarchs. This bird, they're more of a threat to monarchs in Mexico. And so the birds up here generally leave monarchs alone because they taste bad. They eat a caterpillar and they spit it out because it tastes really bad. It doesn't necessarily kill them, but it's just really, they learn once and then they don't ever eat them again. There are a few species of birds in Mexico that do eat monarch butterflies, the adults. And there are two major ones, the black-headed grosbeak and maybe I have that backwards, black-headed grosbeak and black-beaked oriole. And so they differ a little bit. In one of the species can handle the toxins, they just eat them. They just eat the whole abdomen and don't think anything of it. And the other one is really smart, as you said, and they can split the abdomen and only eat the part that's not toxic. So birds are very smart.
What are the other pictures?
The one in the top left is a frog eating a monarch butterfly. I've never seen it. The one on the middle left is a mantid eating a butterfly. We find monarchs trapped in spider nests or spider webs, and there's a little mite here. Here's a mite that sucks out monarch eggs. So there are also monarch eggs are much less toxic than the big caterpillars, and so there are little predators that come and suck out the eggs. So now you can see why only about 10% of the monarchs survive in the wild. So there are a lot of predators, even though they are toxic to them, there are a lot of predators that figure out a way to make it work. So now we will move on to the migration. So these the monarch stages, that's all in the northern breeding grounds, and once the breeding populations, the days start to get shorter and the nights start to get cooler, and so this change in temperature and change in day length triggers a hormone in monarchs to develop in reproductive diapause. And so in reproductive diapause, they will emerge as an adult, but they won't go out and mate. That's not their main goal in life, is not to go find a mate. Their main goal in life is to make it to Mexico. So they nectar and they find other monarchs to group with, and they group in trees, and so you maybe have seen that. But it's this population that doesn't mate in the fall that migrates to Mexico. So starting in late August and early September, these monarchs that are emerging then will stage to migrate to Mexico. And then they start to, as the weather cooperates with them, they start to fly south. And they take these different paths, basically depending on the mountain ranges. So they can't really go through the mountains, so they kind of go around them.
Can they survive freezing weather, freezing temperatures?
They can survive freezing temperatures, but not very well. So it's not uncommon for monarchs to die because of freezing temperatures, but I've seen monarchs that have been outside overnight when it got below freezing, and they were alive the next morning. What? Oh, sorry about that. I didn't even think about it. It'll be on the next map. Okay, so here is another one of the citizen science projects that I've talked about. Well, I haven't named it yet, but it's called Journey North. And so Journey North tracks a lot of different migrations, but the monarch butterfly is one of them. So this is a place for people to go online and say, I saw my first monarch today, and it really helps us to track the migration. So these series of dots, they start as white down here, and then they turn yellow, and then they turn gold, and then they turn red, and then a deeper red. And so that's a time frame. So we can see the monarchs as they progress from Mexico into the central United States and then the northern United States. And you can see how they just kind of explode up at the top. So it's more, what's the word I'm looking for? Congested down in the Texas region, and there's a lot of monarchs in the southern United States, and then all of a sudden those offspring just go everywhere. And so this is this year's map, and you can see by May 9th, these are adult sightings. So Journey North also, that you can track the first milkweed that you see, you can track the first egg that you see. So they have a lot of different cool interactive maps that you can really see where the monarchs are. You can go on there and look where the milkweed is up, because then you know to be looking for milkweed in your area. So you can say, hey, Joe from 5 miles down the road saw milkweed at his house, so I should go out and look at mine. And so this is Journey North. And we use this a lot just to help us know where the monarchs are.
Is that a tag on him?
Yep, this picture is another citizen science project called Monarch Watch. And Monarch Watch has a tagging program, and so they have this little sticker that you can put on the outside of the butterfly wings. It doesn't hurt them, it doesn't hinder their flying, it just sticks to them. And by putting this tag on the monarch and recording where you located the monarch, where you released it, the time you released it, a little bit about the habitat where it was, and then when the monarch is recovered, whether it's dead or if somebody catches it in a different location, it really can tell us where the monarch has been. And so if I tagged a monarch in Minnesota in September and someone recovers it in Mexico in November, then I know that the monarch that I tagged in Minnesota made it to Mexico. And so it's a really interesting project to try and help us understand the migration a little bit better. Oh, and this map here shows the migration patterns. They all go to this fairly finite region in central Mexico. And the monarchs from Minnesota basically have a straight path down, but you can see how from Vermont they kind of have to hug the mountain range here and come around. And there are a few different populations of monarchs. The Rocky Mountains really split the eastern and the western population. There's a little bit of mixing, we think, in Arizona, but for the most part, the monarchs that are to the west of the Rocky Mountains generate to the Pacific. They migrate to the Pacific coast of California in the eucalyptus trees and Monterey pines and Monterey cypress. And then the eastern population, migrates, they all migrate to central Mexico, which is the main overwintering grounds for monarch butterflies.
Are they like salmon in that they'll go back to their place of genetic origin, or is that not known?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question and really good for me to bring up. Monarchs, they do go back to the same locations every year, and they repopulate the same locations in central Mexico, which is really interesting because they've never been there. So it's all instinct, and they somehow know exactly where to go and the right locations for them to be at. This map just shows a little bit. It blows up. We're not going to go into much detail about monarchs and overwintering because that's a whole nother citizen science. So there are about 12 locations in central Mexico where the monarchs cluster and spend the winter. And I have a few photos that better describe what they do in Mexico. So there are just millions of butterflies, and they need not a nectar source. There are too many butterflies in that location for them to be able to nectar all winter long. So the migration is really important for them, and this pathway from wherever they're coming from, it's really important to keep nectar plants available to them because they really need to fuel up for the winter, because in the winter they can't nectar. They do a little bit. There are a few plants there, but not enough to sustain this many butterflies. And so really they eat all the way down, and then it's kind of like hibernation. They don't really eat during the winter, but they do need a source of water because otherwise they will desiccate. So they drink and they nectar just a little bit, but obviously this one little plant can't sustain millions of butterflies in such a tiny area. And then they mate. They don't mate all winter long. They start to mate in about March. And so in March they come out of reproductive diapause. The temperatures are warm and they start to mate, and then they start their migration northward, but they only make it to about Texas. And so there they lay their eggs on the milkweed, and like I said earlier, that generation develops in Texas, and as the adults come out, they start to mate and move farther northward. And predation, this is a picture from a few slides ago. This is one of, I think both species of birds are there that eat the monarchs, but they are a huge threat to monarchs in Mexico because the temperatures are so cold. The temperature in Mexico at where they stay, it's about 3,000 meters above sea level, and so it's really cold. It's in the high elevation Oyamel fir forests of the mountain range there, and so it's just above freezing. They don't stay very warm in Mexico, and that's so that they don't expend all of their energy. They don't have that ability to go fly around, and they don't have nectar available to refuel, and so they cluster in these trees in big groups, and so these birds just come in and eat. So, and the monarchs can't really do anything about it. So, so this is a monarch cluster in a tree. A migration, they fly. It's just this really amazing experience. I myself have never seen it, but if you've ever seen it, it's a really great thing to see. They're flying. You can see them flying over. These trees that appear orange are not dead. They're full of monarchs. And so that's one of the ways that scientists measure the population of monarchs. They obviously can't go in and count every single monarch in there, so they extrapolate this data, they measure the acreage of the plants or of the trees that the monarchs are using, and then they estimate about 10 million monarchs per hectare. And so they use this measurement of area to estimate the overwintering population. So it's...
Is Mexico the only overwintering time? Is Mexico the only place they overwinter?
Mexico is not the only place they overwinter. They also overwinter in California. There's a non-migratory population in southern Florida that breeds all year round.
But this is only in North America? There isn't an equivalent in Europe or Asia?
Or the southern hemisphere?
Or the southern hemisphere going?
There are monarchs in Australia, but also that don't migrate. But no, this is the only migratory monarchs.
But the Australian one is related. The Australian monarch is related to this monarch. It's somehow related, but I guess I'm not really sure. I haven't done a lot of research in that area. No.
And then like I said, starting in March, they start to mate and they repopulate the southern United States, and those move into the summer breeding grounds up here and in Minnesota and in southern Canada. And it's a little bit different in California. They start to move inland a little bit sooner than the monarchs in Mexico. Sure. So now we're going to talk, unless you guys have any more questions about monarch biology or monarch migration.
So the ones in California, they don't go back down to Mexico? Because there were never any arrows leading back down.
The ones in
California.
the ones in California don't migrate to Mexico.
Okay.
They just migrate to the Pacific coast, and they stay in the trees along the coast there, and in little bays. But the climate is similar along the coast to where they're staying in central Mexico. But we're not sure of how much mixing there is, but like I said, in Arizona, there is the possibility that these populations do mix a little bit during the migration. So, Peg, do we need to switch tapes?
It's still going. What if you want to switch up 59? Is this a good logging place?
Yeah, I think this is a good place to take a little break. So the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project is a really good way for us to understand this population of breeding monarchs and their survival, and the predators and the parasitoids that we find, the nectar plants that the monarchs are using in the site. So it's just a really important way for citizen scientists to help us understand monarchs, because the Monarch Lab's headquarters at the University of Minnesota can't monitor all of the populations of monarchs through the whole United States. So that's where we count on you guys. So you guys are representative of Vermont, and you're going to share your data on monarch populations with us. And this is how we can understand what we can do to conserve monarchs, and what we can do to create habitat and to conserve habitat. And it's really just a great project, and it's fun. It's really fun to find things in the wild. So it's for all ages. You can see here, it's a great group. It's great to do with kids. It's great to do with adults. It's great to do with older people. So it's just really great all around. Karen Oberhauser is a professor at the University of Minnesota, and she started this project in 1996. And so the site that I've been monitoring for her has been there from the beginning. So we have many years of data for the site that I monitor. And so you can see how this long-term data that people collect is really, it can really help us quantify the impact of how well the monarchs are using these sites and how they're using the sites. And so we have a bunch of different activities, which I'm going to explain about how we use the data that you guys provide. And it's really important to be accurate and to be thorough and so that we can really understand what's going on out here. So first things first, to be a volunteer, you have to, you should choose a site. And so that sometimes sounds easy, but it's not always easy. In order to find a site, since monarch larvae use milkweed, it has to have milkweed in it. And so it can be your backyard garden. You can plant a new garden with milkweed in it. That can be your site. We monitor at a park. Those are really great sites for milkweed around ponds or lakes. There's a lot of milkweed there. It can be the roadside, a prairie. You guys don't have many prairies around here, but in Minnesota there are a number of prairies. And so to find a site with milkweed, and milkweed is just the main important for monitoring. You have to have milkweed. And so then the first couple pages of the packet go through a number of questions about describing your site. And so this is really important to us too, because we need the location of your site, so the latitude, the longitude, how big it is, and what kind of a landscape it is, whether it's a prairie or whether it's a roadside or whether it's your backyard garden. These are all different habitats. And so for us to understand how monarchs use each of these different habitats, we need you to share that information with us. And a big question that comes up is, how do I define what my site is? And your site is not necessarily just a 10 by 10 square of milkweed. If that's the only place that milkweed is, that's not the site is the whole area. So the contiguous area that contains milkweed. So if we're out in a prairie setting and there's a patch of milkweed here and a patch of milkweed here, but there's no milkweed in between it, we're going to count that whole prairie acreage as our site.
So in terms of physical dimension, how does that get interpreted? Like I'm on a 100-acre farm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely wet spots on that. So would you call that a site on itself?
Yeah, as long as I would call it a site as long as there's no geographic barriers. So if there's a road in there, I would maybe call them separate sites. And you can register more than one site, so you don't have to just have one milkweed site that you monitor. You can call it your east pasture and your west pasture. They could be totally separate sites. And so far here we've only found common milkweed, but it will be important for you to know the milkweed species that are in your site. I would guess that you'll find also swamp milkweed and butterfly milkweed here for sure. And so it's that data is more important for us to understand whether or not there's a preference for monarchs, so where you're really finding them. So if you have half swamp milkweed and half common milkweed, it's really interesting data to look at the monarchs that you're finding there, whether you're finding a whole bunch of eggs on swamp milkweed and none on common milkweed, or vice versa. And so it's really a cool interpretation of how monarchs use the milkweed plants that are there. And then there is weekly monitoring. So this is where we get all of our data from you guys. So once you have your site, you're a registered volunteer, you've filled out all of your information about your site, the location, the description, answered all of our questions, then you can start monitoring. And monitoring, we like to collect data from the time the milkweed comes up to the time that the monarchs leave and you're not finding anything. And so you might not find monarchs for a few weeks when the milkweed starts coming up, but it's really important to note the emergent state of the milkweed, so just so we can tie it together with the monarch arrival. So I've been finding monarchs in Minnesota for 3 weeks, and ideally I should have been monitoring for 2 weeks before that when the milkweed came up, but I didn't have time. So we understand, we're very understanding that ideally this is what we want, but we understand that people aren't going to be able to monitor every week. It's really hard. But so you have your site, the milkweed just came up here, so it's a perfect time to start monitoring. And then, because the absence data is important, because then we can pinpoint exactly when the monarchs arrived, exactly when they left. It's really, really cool data for us to see, to know when they got here. Because if you start monitoring and you find 100 eggs, we don't know how long they've been here. They could have gotten here 2 weeks ago, but we don't know that because you didn't monitor your site the week before. So it's really, really good to try to be consistent in your monitoring. We don't recommend a particular time of the day. If it's really warm, we go monitoring early in the morning so that you can avoid the extreme hot temperatures. But try to be consistent. So you can monitor every Saturday at 9 a.m. or anything that you arbitrarily pick.
If you picked an area like my yard, do you need to be able to count every milkweed? Well, I mean, how are we going to decide which ones to look at?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was for the camera, how to pick which milkweeds that you're going to monitor and whether or not you should monitor all of them. And we're really looking for data that is quality versus quantity, because we see a lot of times that if people are monitoring 200 plants in half an hour, it's really unrealistic for them to be able to thoroughly look at those plants. And so we would rather you monitor 50 random plants, but do it thoroughly, because people will find 100 eggs one week, and then they won't find anything for the majority of the summer, but then all of a sudden they find a bunch of fifth instars. And so we know that data is inaccurate, because if they find fifth instars more so than eggs, we know that the eggs were there at one point, and so they didn't find them. And so it's really important for us to see that data trend. So they're finding eggs and they're finding other instars. So we want people to be thorough and find what's really on the milkweed plant, rather than just looking at 100 plants because that's what they need to do. So if you have a whole bunch of milkweed on your site and there's no way that you would be able to monitor it every week, we have a protocol in the instructions of the data sheet how to walk transects through your property and through your site, so that you can monitor only the plants along this transect to get a random sampling of all of the plants that are there. But ideally, if your garden is small enough, you would monitor every plant, every milkweed plant.
So the main thing is when you identify a plant and you get going, keep sticking with those individual plants, right? So you're following each individual plant.
Not necessarily. If you're walking transects in a field, you want it to be random every week. You don't want to monitor the same plants every week. So if you're in a big prairie field or a big grass field with milkweed all over it, you want to walk, just randomly select a transect to walk across the field, and then walk another transect until you feel like you've created an accurate sample. Because I understand why you would question that you want to monitor the same milkweeds for survival, but by randomly selecting them each week, you got an accurate representation of what's out there. So if you found 10 eggs on 100 plants, that should be representative of the rest of the plants that you didn't monitor. So if there were 200 plants out there, you could assume that there were 20 eggs. So the data that way seems, we're trying to, really everything has to be random.
If you only have a small area, then monitoring just that small area is still of value to you.
Yes.
I mean, I don't have a prairie.
Yeah.
But I have a backyard.
Yeah, a lot of our MLMP sites are backyards and home gardens, and that data is just as important, because then we can quantify the impact that home gardens have on the monarch, not necessarily on the entire monarch population, but if you have monarchs that are using your garden and that are surviving in your garden, that's really important for us to understand how the monarchs are utilizing these home gardens versus a natural prairie. It's really cool to see the difference.
Just to back up a minute,
Mm-hmm.
the monarchs in Australia are related to the monarchs here because they were introduced.
They were introduced in Australia?
In the 1870s, they're not a native species.
Interesting.
There's a lot of things in Australia that were introduced.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Beyond the criminal.
So these are our monitoring locations. This is a live map that's on our website, and I just copied it over. So all of the red squares are actual monitoring sites where people people report data every year. I shouldn't say every year. People don't report data every year, but they're all monitoring sites. And so you can see we have a pretty widespread distribution in the west central United States. There, in the mountain ranges, there are not a lot of monarchs, and so we don't get a lot of volunteers out there. And so the red squares are actual monitoring sites, and the blue squares is another opportunity for people to report data to us. So we call it anecdotal observations. And so if you have a milkweed site set up and you're reporting data for that particular milkweed site, but you traveled to 20 miles down the road one day and you found this great patch of milkweed there and you found some monarchs on it, this is the place where you can report that data to us. So it's if you don't have an actual site set up for it, you don't plan on going there every week, but you came across milkweed or monarchs, you can report that to us. And so it's still really cool, really good for us to see those random points where people are finding monarchs and finding milkweed, and it helps us to quantify the habitat that's available to monarchs, other than just the sites that people are monitoring every week. So this is an example of monarch data. It's from 2007, it's quite a while ago, but it's really good representation of what people find in the wild. So you can see on May 6th, they started monitoring and they found nothing. They probably, it doesn't have the number of plants that they monitored, but they probably monitored a number of plants, didn't find any eggs, and then the following week, they found eggs. And so that's really important for us to see that it was from that week, from 5/6 to 5/13, that the monarchs arrived and started laying eggs. And so we can really see the trend of where the monarchs are and what they're doing. And then the following week they found 3 times as many more eggs, and then they started finding first instars and second instars, which is representative because the eggs will have hatched and you should start to find caterpillars. But you notice how they found very fewer of the first and second instars because of predation and because the survival rate is so low. And so this helps us to estimate the survival. And as the weeks go on, you can see they start to see fifths and they start to see everything out there. So yeah, so these graphs are available for all of the sites that are monitored, and everybody can see the graphs from all over the United States. So it's the density of the monarchs per milkweed. So if you monitored 200 milkweed plants and you found 10 eggs, then it's the density of monarchs over per milkweed. So you can calculate this is calculating the number of monarchs in your site, the density of the monarchs in your site.
So you're going to have a site which may have several patches,
Mm-hmm.
possibly. I haven't looked at the data sheet, but when you do a row on the data sheet to indicate that you found an egg or an instar, we also tally that on one plant?
There are a few different data sheets which we'll go over. So you can calculate the total. One of the easier activities is to calculate the total density per plant, and or the total monarch density in the whole site. So the total monarchs over the total number of plants, but then there is an additional data sheet that you can keep track of monarchs on individual plants. And that data sheet, to keep track of monarchs per milkweed plant, will help us to understand the survival or the how monarchs survive when there's 2 or 5 or 10 eggs on that plant versus when there was just 1. So there are options. Which
So you said the pupa's not there because you said they avoid the milkweed plant at that stage, right?
Yep, there is a section to report a pupa if you find it, but for the most part, people don't find a monarch pupa on the milkweed plant.
And how far do they generally travel to get into the pupa stage?
It's hard to say. I don't know that there's actually a standard measurement of how far the monarchs will go. They obviously can't travel miles, but they can travel several feet to get away from the plant. St. Paul really shows the generations of the monarchs. So you can see the peaks over the weeks of the summer. The peaks of the monarchs, those are where we understand where the generations come from. So the monarchs that arrived in May, that would be the generation that arrived here. And then you could see another generation happened during the late July and early August. So you can see that that's when that generation of butterflies that arrived here in May, that's when that generation emerged and started laying eggs again. So that's how we can understand how the generations. So most data should look similar to this. You should be able to see the peaks.
So when they migrate, it's generally during a very short time period, and we're seeing, as you say, generations, we're not seeing continuous migration. Right?
No, the migration generally starts in, so the monarchs that emerge in late August and early September are the only ones that will migrate.
Right?
Sure.
One of them said for all of Minnesota and one said for a particular town.
Oh, yeah, so when we get into I'll go over how to use our website, and it pulls up a map of the United States, and so you can pick the particular area that you want. So what do we, what comes of this data that you guys are giving us? And we do a lot with MLMP data, with citizen science data. It's really an important way for us to understand monarchs. And so it helps us to understand small and large scale patterns of monarch abundance, like I was talking about. So what kinds of habitats they're really using, and what sorts of plants are there, and the size of those areas, and the surrounding areas. All of that data really helps us to understand what the monarchs are using and what they have available to them. To teach others about monarchs and milkweed, and they are a great teaching tool. And so the data, we've written papers about, how to study monarchs, and the data that's out there helps us to come up with research projects, and we can inform conservation agencies about using our data. They can base their conservation efforts on data that we've found. Next. This kind of just touches on what I just said. Be involved in real science, and to feel like you're contributing to the big picture. You're really making a difference in this scientific process for us, and people love it. You raise one monarch and you fall in love with them.